It's time for another episode of The Big Bid Theory. This is your co-host, Bill Culhane, here from our studios in Austin, Texas, and I've got a tremendous weather report for those of you who have been keeping track of the weather in Texas. We went weeks, we went seemingly months without a drop of rain, and lo and behold, in the last 48, 72 hours or so, precipitation has hit central Texas. Anyway, I know you always enjoy me passing along the weather report. A big show coming up today. Many of you know, if you've been keeping an eye on things the past decade or so, energy efficiency has become such a hot topic, not just in the United States, of course, but elsewhere around the world. And in this episode of The Big Bid Theory, we are going to visit with an expert on the energy industry. Specifically, we're going to be talking a lot about energy efficiency, microgrids, nanogrids, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, a number of topics that are in and around the energy industry. But again, the focus is going to be on energy efficiency in this episode of The Big Bid Theory as we get to the back stretch of season 4 of this show. No crazy bid in this episode. Jim has taken a brief hiatus, but hope to have the Jim Ward back for our next episode of this show. So now it's that time, The Big Bid Theory, powered by Bid Prime. Here's my visit with Elisa Wood.
On the Big Bid Theory hotline, we welcome in Elisa Wood from Real Energy Writers and Microgridknowledge.com. Elisa, I mentioned at the top of the show that when I returned from New York, lo and behold, there was some rain here in the Austin area, and so we had kind of a wet Labor Day in central Texas. But how are things in your part of the world? How was your Labor Day?
My Labor Day was great. I am in Virginia, right near Charlottesville, not too far from D.C., and we are sunny and hot here.
Let's get to the matter at hand, Elisa. You will do a far better job of giving your background than I will ever pretend to do. So tell our listeners a little bit about how you came to be interested in the energy industry. Who are the Real Energy Writers? What is Microgridknowledge.com? And how do you go about telling the stories in and around the energy industry?
I'm fascinated by energy and have been for almost 3 decades now, because it affects everything in the economy, has profound effect on our society, our politics. It's one of those things that just kind of reaches into everything. And so what we do in energy really does affect our lives, even though it's kind of an arcane topic that people don't always think about. So I've been writing about energy for over 2 decades. My partner, Elisa Wood, and I started a company called Real Energy Writers, which specializes in translating these complex topics to everybody else, those who aren't energy nerds like us. We write for a lot of major companies and associations, doing their white papers and reports and blogs and those kind of things. And then this company, Real Energy Writers, is owned by another company called Energy Efficiency Markets, which also has Microgrid Knowledge, which is a news website that specializes in microgrids, which are one of the very hot, very interesting new technologies in energy that it's taking off today.
Everyone, Elisa, has their own thoughts on why energy efficiency is important, and you kind of touched upon it. You know, here in 2018, energy efficiency is all over the news. As a matter of fact, I took a glance literally this morning, and obviously our listeners can do the same. And everybody is talking about, everybody is writing about energy efficiency, but in terms of why it's important, and I don't mean, and you and I, we understand it's not just at home, it's also at work, it's in our schools. Many of the reasons that energy efficiency is important, everybody has kind of an understanding on those reasons, but here's the big question. In your opinion, you're there in the trenches, so to speak. Why is energy efficiency important? What are the benefits for businesses, for government, for Joe and Mary citizen?
There's a saying in the field that no kilowatt of energy is cheaper than the one not used. So that's the basic underlying, reason to pursue energy efficiency. You're going to save money because you're buying less energy if you're using less energy. Of course, if you're using less energy, you're also producing fewer emissions because power plants, our power sector is still mostly uses fossil fuels for generation. So if you're burning less fossil fuels, you're creating less pollution in the air. So that's another, very big reason for energy efficiency. And I think, I think it's in the news a lot right now because we've had a very hot summer. I think last I read, it was the fourth hottest on record. So, we have the air conditioners whirring and using lots and lots of energy, causing prices to rise as a result of that. This is kind of the perfect time right after the summer to be talking about energy efficiency.
Yeah, no doubt that winter looming on the horizon.
Yeah, and winter's the same. I mean, it's extreme weather that really causes us to use a lot of energy, very hot and very cold.
Earlier this week, I looked in BidPrime's database, and we've seen the explosive growth in LED solutions, the SCADA industry, which I had no idea what SCADA was even 5 years ago, but that industry is booming. Retrofits and other energy efficiency projects, power plants, you see everything. The email that you sent to me last week before I left for the Big Apple, it really got me excited, Elisa, and anybody who's listened to the podcast for a while understands that we like to talk tech here on the Big Bid Theory. But I looked at your email, virtual power plants, nanogrids, microgrids, learning thermostats, oh my gosh, Internet of Energy. You've written at length on a lot of those topics. So how has technology specifically served as a game changer in energy efficiency? And if you could, I'm a third grader when it comes to energy efficiency, but could you briefly describe some of those wonderfully intriguing technologies that you sent over in your email?
So, yes, energy efficiency has changed. I mean, a couple of decades ago when I started writing about energy efficiency, it was mostly described as conservation. It was mostly about sacrifice. It was, turn up your thermostat and be a little warmer so you can save energy, or turn off your lights and, squint a little more. Put
on a sweater, right? Put on a sweater.
Put on a sweater, the Jimmy Carter sweater, that image of him before the fireplace. So, yes, that's where it started. But technology has changed it dramatically. And now it's no longer about sacrifice. Instead, it's about using these intelligent technologies so that we can use less energy without sacrifice. One of the fascinating things that's going on is, artificial intelligence is starting to come into play in this field. And that's where you get into the learning thermostat and those kind of technologies. A company called Nest is a big one that does this, and there's a lot. They do a lot of work in Texas. The thermostat actually learns your behavior in the house, so it can anticipate and it can set itself so that your comfort. It knows when you're out of the house, that kind of thing, or when you're not using a lot of energy. So it follows your patterns, and then is able to, without you having to think about always adjusting the thermostat, it can do it for you. So that's one thing, but it gets even more interesting than that. So microgrids, nanogrids, virtual power plants, this is where you start to think about generating electricity in highly efficient ways. And one of the things people don't always think about is, you're driving down the road, you see these big wires, right? They transmit energy, they transmit electricity. What people don't often know is that as that electricity travels down those wires, a good amount of it gets lost, like 5 to 7%. So that's a fair amount of money that just disappears. It just dissipates as it travels. Because of that problem, if you think about it, it's better to have your energy source closer to where it's used. So that's where this concept of microgrids and nanogrids comes in. Basically, a microgrid is a tiny grid. You think of a grid, it's got power plants, it's got wires, and it's got customers, right? So that's exactly what a microgrid is, but on a smaller scale. So you might have, say, a community microgrid where you have maybe a fire station, a hospital, a school, perhaps some homes, and then you have a small generator, maybe a solar panels, plus some energy storage, maybe some natural gas turbines, and that little system will serve those people. And because it's close, it doesn't lose the power along the way. But it's more to it than that. That's just one little benefit of microgrids. They also have this ability to island. Now, another big thing in energy, kind of a massive inefficiency, efficiency, I guess you'd say, is loss of power. Sometimes we have hurricanes, we have wildfires,
Sure.
we have these different kind of calamities, lightning strikes, and squirrels nibble on a wire, and we lose power. That's an enormous inefficiency to a society that is completely based on electrification. Suddenly your factory goes down for several hours, or your computer goes down, you can't work, or whatever. We've all experienced it. It's a huge loss of money to society whenever we lose power. A microgrid is a way to ensure that you always have power, because it has this nifty little thing it can do, thanks to its software intelligence, called islanding. That means that the microgrid will sense when there's it's connected to the main grid, and it will sense when there's a disruption occurring on the main grid, and it will separate itself from that main grid so it's not part of that problem. So what happens on the main grid when there's a power outage is we have these things called cascading failures. You'll be out of power, but the tree on the wire will be 100 miles away or something like that. It's because of these cascading failures that occur. One segment goes down, then the next segment is all interconnected. The grid's all interconnected. So the microgrid senses that kind of failure coming, separates itself, and can continue to serve its buildings right there. At other times, another interesting thing about the microgrid is because it's connected at all times to the grid, except during these islanding periods, it's able to provide services to the grid. So a lot of stuff goes on. The grid is a very complicated thing. And, sometimes it gets a little bit out of balance. Sometimes it's producing too little power at a certain time or too much power at a certain time. Well, the grid and the microgrid can talk to each other, and the microgrid can say, hey, I'll shoot a little extra power your way so that, that you need it very quickly for these few minutes. That's another way it's highly efficient. It can serve the grid when the grid needs it. It can separate from the grid when it's in trouble and you want to protect certain customers. And it also provides electricity very close to the source. And then there's other things too. It tends to use renewable generation, so there's not a lot of emissions involved. It's not as polluting as a lot of generation. So these are the kind of things that are happening now. We're getting more local with our energy. We're getting smaller, but we're getting a lot more intelligent too. These little powerhouses of microgrids can do a whole lot for such small little entities. Often we'll serve a factory, for instance, or a data center that really can't go down because if it loses its power, it loses a lot of money. Nanogrids are almost the same thing, except they're even a smaller scale. A nanogrid is the same concept, except for just one building rather than several buildings. I
was just going to point out, Elisa, I've taken a peek at microgridknowledge.com, and there's a treasure trove of information on microgrids, nanogrids. If anybody in our audience wants to go to that website, touch upon virtual power plants. What are those? We all know what a power plant is. It's usually like a big building somewhere, and it has a generator, and it generates power. So a virtual power plant is something that creates power or the effect of power without having a large centralized generation plant. So I'll give you an example. Right here in Charlottesville, where I live, a few years back, there was a move to develop a virtual power plant based on energy efficiency. The grid needed a certain amount of power. I don't remember how much, maybe it was 1 megawatt of power. Now, they could build some generation to serve the grid, to create that 1 megawatt, or they could start a campaign to get LED light bulbs and high-efficiency air conditioners and other energy-efficient equipment put in a certain number of houses to reduce the power by 1 megawatt so that they kind of created the same effect of generating 1 megawatt, so it's virtual. So that's kind of a simple virtual power plant. Today there's even more complex ones going on where people are taking batteries, energy storage, which is another new and very exciting and quickly coming on the scene technology. They'll take batteries and put them in several buildings and say the grid again needs 1 megawatt. Those batteries will have also solar panels on the buildings. The solar panels will have generated 1 megawatt, put it into the battery, and then when the grid needs that 1 megawatt, they can call upon those buildings to release those batteries. So again, it's the equivalent of having a fossil fuel burning 1 megawatt power plant sitting there, but instead
You've got power generated by the sun, absorbed by the solar panels, and then released into the grid when it was needed. So that's why it's virtual. There's no actual power plant involved.
Over the years, our longtime listeners know that we've had guests on, experts on virtual reality, artificial intelligence, terrorism. We had Dr. Colin Clark on years ago from Carnegie Mellon talking about terrorism. We've talked about cybersecurity, the Internet of Things, and so that leads me, Lisa, when I hear you talk about virtual learning thermostat. Is cybersecurity a concern at all in the energy industry?
Big concern, yes. Because, our enemy actors are definitely going after the grid. Homeland Security has made that clear. They'd love to take down these parts of the electric grid because we're so dependent on electricity. So it's a huge issue. Again, that's kind of where microgrids are being built. The military is actually a big endorser and supporter and builder of microgrids. And one of the reasons for that is because they want all of the bases to be completely cyber secure. They want their electric grids to be cyber secure. So again, say the grid was hacked, the microgrid would sense disruption occurring and would island off. So any critical military facility would be able to use power from that microgrid. Now, that's not to say a microgrid can't be hacked, too. Anything can be hacked, right?
Sure.
But it's a lot harder to get many different devices that can separate from something as opposed to get to attacking one central source. So that's kind of the logic behind microgrids. And actually, another interesting thing is some of the newer microgrids use software technology and controllers that have kind of a double, triple redundancy so that they are protected if they're hacked. So, it's a fascinating area, and I think I would say it's one of the big drivers right now for government microgrids.
Hey, we had an expert on from ASCE a couple of years ago, and we specifically talked about infrastructure, and cybersecurity came up, and for the reasons you spelled out, Elisa, as you and I were having our conversation here, I was thinking to myself, cybersecurity, here's another area, another industry in which cybersecurity is so important. Now, the big bit theory, we talk a lot about governments, but we don't talk about politicians, we don't talk about parties, what have you. Look at the public sector, Elisa, local federal agencies, whoever. Are there directives, regulations, incentives, et cetera, that are having an impact on the goal of energy efficiency?
Oh, there sure are. I mean, there are quite a few states that have energy efficiency goals and mandates. There are quite a few corporations, or even government buildings, agencies. There's a lot of kind of individual entities that have their own energy efficiency mandates, as well as like city mandates, state mandates. So, I think that's been going on for a while. That we've had targets and goals to improve energy efficiency, and then I think some of these new technologies have kind of been born out of that desire to reach those goals and create more efficiencies. Interestingly, just over Friday night, the California legislature finished up its 2018 term, and they passed, I heard it was just minutes before they closed out at midnight on August 31st, they passed a microgrid bill to support more microgrid development in the state, make it easier for microgrids to be installed by companies and other kinds of electricity customers. And that's kind of, always watch California. That's where a lot of the energy innovation occurs in terms of efficiency and these kind of technologies. Also, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Texas, these are the states to really keep an eye on. Lots of innovation going on.
Elisa, when I call you 10 years from now, what are you and I going to be talking about?
We will be talking about the fact that the transportation system and the electric system are rapidly becoming one and the same because electric vehicles are going to be batteries, energy storage, that will be not only getting us from place to place, but also serving the grid to increase efficiency in ways that we can't even begin to imagine right now.
Well, Elisa, it is now that point of our conversation, our visit, where, and our longtime listeners know about this, but in the description of the podcast, we will share any kind of links to specific reports or research that you've done or you think is important for our listening audience? And also, if you could include any kind of contact information, whether it be social media, URLs, what have you, how can folks track you down?
In terms of where to go for more information, you already mentioned microgridknowledge.com is a great source on these new technologies. RealEnergyWriters.com will tell you a little bit more about us. I'd also suggest when you're at microgridknowledge.com, take a look at our white paper library. Lots and lots of good information if you want to dive deeper. We have one report out called Think Microgrid, and I think you can find that just by Googling thinkmicrogrid.com. That'll give you some good information. And then you can follow me on LinkedIn, Elisa Wood. You can follow Microgrid Knowledge on Twitter, which is at Microgrid News. God, we're all over the place on social media, so there's several places. If you Google us, Microgrid Knowledge, Elisa Wood, Real Energy Writers, you'll find us.
Perfect, and I can confirm that there's a number of ways to find Elisa, and also Real Energy Writers and microgridknowledge.com. So, Elisa, on behalf of our the Big Bid Theory audience, so much appreciate you sharing your expertise. All the best to you, and hopefully our paths will cross again down the road at some point.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bill. I really enjoyed speaking to you.
Thank you again to Elisa for taking some time to share her expertise. So there you have it, virtual power plants, nanogrids, microgrids, a lot of information that hopefully you'll find of benefit to not just yourself, your business, or if you're in and around government, around the public sector, maybe energy efficiency is something that you need to take a more specific focus on. So that's going to do it for this episode of the show. We thank you so much for taking just a brief second to share, download, and follow the show. Please keep the emails coming. Jim and I always enjoy hearing from folks in our audience. You can email me at bcallhane@bidprime.com. Jim, his email address is jward@bidprime.com. Don't forget, we're on Twitter. You can follow us at The Big Bid Theory. If you want to send or follow or keep in touch on our specific Twitter handles, my Twitter handle is contract_hunter. And Jim is jward6. And also, don't forget, we're over on Facebook as well. Would sure appreciate you taking a second to like our Facebook page. So, powered by BidPrime, for Ricky Jennings, our wonderful, talented producer, for Lauren, all of our TBBT staff, for Jim Ward. Remember, folks, energy efficiency, turn those lights off when you're not in the room. Thanks to Elisa Wood for visiting with us, Real Energy Writers and microgridknowledge.com. This is Bill Culhane. Until next time, saving energy makes sense. Go Gunners, Barracudas, Tigers, Bobcats, and Cubs, and we wish you all the best in growing your business.
Powered by BidPrime, we thank you for tuning in to The Big Bid Theory. From Austin, Texas, the show is produced by Bill Culhane and Jim Ward. Producer and engineer is Rick Jennings. Distribution, research, and production assistance by Lauren Jones and Kevin Henderson. You can find other episodes of The Big Bid Theory on platforms to include iHeart, iTunes, Spreaker, and Google Play.